2005 when a group got together and hosted the first forest conservation conference to discuss the health of Sonoma County's forests. This group consists of a number of different organizations such as CAL FIRE, the Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation Open Space District, Sonoma Land Trust, the different watershed groups, Sonoma RCD, the Gold Ridge RCD. We have a lot of different people who are representing their own businesses, such as forestry consultants. And as a whole, it's a consortium of different organizations who have come together to discuss how do we improve the forest health here in Sonoma County. And today we're going to focus on the economics of it. We have three excellent presenters here today who are going to highlight various funding mechanisms that they are proponents for and can help landowners figure out how to finance some of the forestry activities that they would like to do on their land. I'm going to start with Jill Butler, who is works for CAL FIRE since 1994, and she is the leader of the EQIP funding program. Is that correct?
Close enough.
Close enough. CFIP, sorry, CFIP. And so she'll get into much more detail there. Jill went to school at Sonoma State and Cal and received a bachelor's degree in biology, and she was raised in Oakland. Okay. Next on our panel we have Drew Loganville, who is a soil conservationist from the NRCS. He has been working for NRCS for the last 4.5 years and was graduated from Cal Poly in forestry, forest sciences, and then was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Fiji Islands. Okay, and then finally we have Megan Sheeline, who is the vegetation management program forester for CAL FIRE, and she is also a graduate of Cal Berkeley in the forestry program. She is a licensed California forester. She worked on seasonal forestry efforts before CAL FIRE, but has been in this position for 2 years with CAL FIRE, and she'll elaborate on what she does there. So we're going to start with about a 15-minute presentation by Jill, followed by Drew, and then finally Megan. And then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the sessions to provide for a little question and answer session, okay? So with that, Jill, I'll be your buddy.
You'll be the slide advisor.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Unless you'd like to, I can give you that.
Well, we'll figure it out.
All right. Just wink, nod, or otherwise.
Okay, and I'm going to give you an overview of the program I work with, the California Forest Improvement Program. And Penny, maybe you could help me pass those out. There's slightly fewer handouts than there are the number of people here, so if some of you are here with a family member, maybe you can share. And then I think there'll be enough to go around. And I'm going to be talking about eligibility for requirements for the Scfcwg program, what kind of work it can fund, and also how it relates with Drew's program, the EQIP program. Okay, and I'm ready for the next slide. And eligibility requirements, and most of what I'm going to tell you is summarized on that fact sheet. The main requirements for my program relate to the property and the amount of acreage. So the property needs to have at least 20, but not more than 5,000 acres of forest land. And the forest, we have extras, so if anybody didn't get one and wants one, there's more. And Kim, I'm just about ready for you. So forest land, for the purposes of this program, is an area with at least 10% canopy cover composed of native species. So those can be commercial conifers like the redwoods that were on the last picture, but they, no, we're good. Next slide, please. They can also be native oaks and other hardwood species like riparian species, and also forest openings that are surrounded by trees. So most of the landscape that you see in this slide would be eligible to be considered forest land. Okay, ready for the next slide. The first step to participation in the program is getting a management plan written for the property. We have a new format for those plans that qualifies people to participate in both the CFIP and the EQIP program. If you've had a management plan written in years past that needs updating, it can be updated. And in most cases, it will cover your entire property, even if there are parts of your property that aren't actually forest. Okay, next slide. And now we're getting into some of the kinds of work that can be funded through CFIP. And the CFIP program, we're going to be emphasizing these forestry practices that we'll look at first. So first is site preparation. Usually this is done manually with grubbing, like the nice lady with the McLeod, or some combination of that and chainsaws. Sometimes it's done mechanically. We don't see that too often in California. And unfortunately, more and more it's being done by wildfires. Like, a lot of projects Drew and I will be working with up in Lake County, the folks that went through fires up there. All right. And that's to get ready for tree planting. We can also protect the trees with either the mesh Vexar or the 2Vex type tree shelters. And in both cases, we're trying to protect trees, mostly from deer browse. We also have two different kinds of activities we kind of lump under the umbrella of follow-up. So the first would be things done within 3 years to help little trees survive, and that might include things like weed mats or shade cards or a release to cut back competing vegetation. We also use that category for slash disposal. So we can fund chipping, piling and burning, or use of a masticator to treat slash. Right? Then there are the categories of thinning and releasing trees. And in this slide, we're also illustrating another point, which is commercial versus non-commercial activities. So in this clump of redwoods we see in that picture, if you want to remove the very smallest stems, that would be considered thinning. That was pre-commercial, and that would be eligible for CFIP funding. If you wanted to remove the biggest stems, those would be logs, and that would be logging. And then you'd be talking to someone like this Megan, not to be confused with that Megan, who works with our forest practice program. So that's a regulated activity that is not eligible for CFIP funding. We can also fund pruning, and we can put all those practices together, like happened on the Dirkson's property where this picture was taken, and do thinning and release and pruning and slash disposal. And then we have created a shaded fuel break. And folks that are interested in doing fuels reduction or fire safety kind of projects, this is the end result that we work with them on creating. And that's how we accomplish it through the CFIP program. It works a little bit different with EQIP. Now, so the forestry practices are what we're going to be emphasizing with the CFIP program. We can fund a number of other practices that we lump together and call conservation. And that can include things like putting in check dams and doing gully repair. And doing road work. I will mention at this point that if you have a big road project, we're probably going to be steering you to Drew's EQIP program. Although if you have small components on the same property and you're doing fuels reduction or fire rehab, we may take care of you under CFIP. So that's, but we collaborate and that's what we're looking at doing in the future. We can fund wildlife habitat improvement projects through CFIP, and a good example is planting native oaks. And we can do a number of different kinds of fisheries habitat improvement projects, and that can include installing in-stream structures and also doing things out of the stream channel, like planting riparian species and putting up exclusion fencing along streams. Okay, and in conclusion, I want to mention that the big thing that's new in the CFIP program, other than this new format for the management plan, is that we have funding now for practices. And this hasn't been the case for several years, so I'm real happy to be able to share that news with you today, that we do have funds available for both plans and on-the-ground project work at this point. Okay, and I think that's it in a nutshell.
That sounds great.
Turn it over to the next speaker.
Well, thank you for the good introduction, and as you'll notice, a lot of what we do at the NRCS and what Jill does with CAL FIRE and the CFIP program, there's definitely a lot of overlap, and you'll see that too in this presentation. But I am with the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Go to the next slide. We work with all agricultural land uses, but today I'll be talking primarily on forestry. We are part of the Department of Agriculture, United States Department of Agriculture, and essentially what we do is provide technical assistance and financial assistance for private landowners. We're looking to either provide any information and guidance you might need, or more popular is our financial assistance, which is through the EQIP program. And the EQIP program is under the Farm Bill, and there's multiple initiatives in the EQIP program. As you see, EQIP stands for Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And for the forest land, we have a locally led initiative, and it's for the Central Coast Fund Pool, so that goes from Santa Barbara County all the way up to Sonoma County, and pretty much the coastal range there. Typically what I've seen with our locally led initiative is majority of the applications have been coming from Sonoma County since I've been working here. We do get some Santa Cruz, Monterey County, but it is a competitive process, and every year differs depending on how much funds are available within the Farm Bill and for the states. So some years we get a lot of projects funded, some years it could be kind of pretty competitive. So I'll get more into that. So essentially the way our program works is we're addressing the resource concerns that might be on the property, whether it be soil erosion, a lot of times it's road related, so soil erosion, other times you have gully erosion, as you know, I think Jill had a really good picture of the gully erosion, and those are things that we could address. And then associated with that is the water quality degradation. Essentially the main thing we're looking at in forest land is usually elevated amounts of sediment in the streams, and then water temperature. It could be critical, and those are both really the focuses, especially in Sonoma County and on the coast, is for the salmon habitat, and both those can be detrimental to the salmon habitat. Next one. And so, and then another part is the degraded plant condition, and that's a lot of the things of, I think the more popular resource concern I see out in these areas is abundance of fuel load and overstocked stands. And also, the inadequate structure composition, that's also has to do with past logging activities where it's been, maybe the forest has been logged really hard, or even fires come through and you get an abundance of maybe tan oaks or bays where versus the conifer species, and we can help try to adjust that whether through thinning practices and replanting, and that's something, and it always depends on what your management objective is, so and that could differ between all private landowners there. Invasive plant pest pressure, that really has to do with either some diseases that might be in the forest, like sudden oak death, and some management activities we do to address that, and especially invasive weeds. There's lots of invasive weeds out there that we try to help you manage and control sometimes. And then also to mention the fish and wildlife habitat and other things similar as Jill presented on is the large woody debris, trying to arrest stream bank erosion and things like that. So the forest management plan is a critical component of this. We highly recommend that if you're interested in the EQIP program that you come in with some type of forest management plan. The most thorough ones we're seeing are the ones through what Jill was talking about that many people are getting through Scfcwg. We also offer funding for forest management plans. But they're done by a RPF, a registered professional forester, and they're very thorough, and they do a lot of inventory, and they have a lot of recommendations of what improvements can be done, and those are very applicable to our program. And so it's a really great tool to work off of and work off your highest priority objectives in that plan, and then help you implement those. Maybe go to the next slide. So the common issues and common practices we do, usually a lot of stuff that I've been working on recently is poor road infrastructure. That's commonly seen in, or actually I've been told EQIP's one of the few programs out there that have funding for road improvement. So that's where we like to work where needed. We see a lot of in-slope roads and lack of water bars or rolling dips that are causing some major issues and creating a lot of erosion and sediment in the creeks. Next one. So installing rolling dips or water bars, and there's some pictures I'll keep coming on these ones. So it's an example of a rolling dip here. They seem, having something that's easy to drive along, but also getting the water off the road, so you're not having this long connectivity of runoff coming down the road, and that will cause rills and therefore cause some gullies, and it could be a major problem. This seems to be a helpful way to address that kind of erosion. Outsloping roads, the next one. Culvert replacements, a lot of times I see a lot of rusted out culverts that are really prone to failure or if they haven't failed already. And then upgrading them to size so they can withstand a 100-year storm event. And then the next one would be rock fords, and those are another way to upgrade a crossing, have a really armored ford so you could drive over it, less maintenance on the culvert because you don't have that flood potential. And then, as I mentioned, overstocked forest, it's really to get that fuel load reduction down. We're doing a lot of thinning practices in forest improvement and shaded fuel breaks, and then also treating the slash. And oftentimes you see areas with lots of sudden oak death, and you get a lot of dead and down trees. We come in and do slash, whether it be chipping or just lop and scatter and get that slash down. So for the next one. So these are a couple examples of shaded fuel break there. So, and I think we'll kind of keep going through these. Here's reforestation, so there's some tree planting and some thinning, and this is kind of more to release some of the species already there. Sometimes you get overstock conditions and you have young redwoods or firs that or any other management species that you're managing for, be able to release that could be very helpful in the growth. And a few others, this is a seedling planted, we kind of go through some of these. Large woody debris, those are things that we could help implement. One thing I want to let you know too is in our office we do have, in order to implement these projects, a lot of these require some sort of engineering. We do have engineering capabilities within the office. We have engineer and engineer tech on our staff. They can do engineering on projects up to a certain level. Sometimes the projects can get very complex and it might be above and beyond what our in-office engineer can do. And sometimes, there could be recommendations to get an outside engineer to come in with a plan and we can work off that. But we are trying more and more to have the ability to address these engineering needs in office. So it's a really great benefit coming through our program for that reason. One thing that we do as a landowner is, especially in stream, is that they go through the process of getting the permits that are needed. Obviously, we're going to stream as many permits you'll need to, and we can help guide you on what permits are, but we're non-regulatory, so we're not, we don't want to get too involved in that process. So a lot of times our local partners can help with that. Otherwise, we can direct you in the right direction for that. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. The other thing with our programs too is that, when we're doing some of these practices and then in these environment, we want to make sure that for us being a federal agency, we have to have our NEPA compliance. And so we have to do our biological review and cultural resource review. We do have biologists and archaeologists on staff, so essentially what we'll do is we'll have biologists review the contract, if you get into the EQIP contract, and make sure there won't be any impacts on any threatened endangered species. That's something because we can't put federal taxpayer dollars into projects that might affect a certain species. I think the main one that really restricts when you can do work in our area is northern spotted owl, because potentially all the areas habitat for spotted owls, so we have to really work as a non-avoidance or no impact work window. And then cultural resource review is pretty commonly go do a record search in Sonoma State and just make sure that whatever practice we're doing, we're not going to impact any reported sites. So something to keep in mind about our projects. As far as program eligibility, it's private land, so you have to either own the land, have a deed, or have control of the land, whether through a lease or lease agreement. So we have a adjusted gross income limitation, which is $900,000. So as long as you're under that, you're good to go. And then for our payment limitation for EQIP, per farm bill, which is every 6 years, it's $450,000. So that's as much as we could contribute to projects. And you could come in for multiple contracts through the years, and we have many people that do that. And that's how I usually advise people, is come in, do a small chunk, and make sure the program works well with you. And you continue to come in and get more, put in more applications and get more contracts with us. The other part is we have different payment rates. They're all fixed rates, but we have a regular farmer rate and a historically underserved rate. And our application will describe if you fit under that, but it's a little bit higher cost share rate, so the money goes a lot further. These are all, it's incentive programs, so the way it works is that if you do come in, and I guess go to the next slide here, you come in and make an appointment with our farm bill assistant. Her name's Heather in our office, and she can help you fill out the application packet. And once you submit the packet, we'll come out and do a site visit and see what your needs are, hopefully go off your forest management plan and see what we can help you with and prioritize those practices. And then your application is ranked, and then it's the funding allocation goes to the highest ranked applicants. If you do get a contract with us, once we get everything cleared, we'll go through and give you practice requirements, and we want to see the work implemented before we reimburse for that practice. So oftentimes we'll do large acreages of thinning or even a large shade fuel break, and we can break it up into segments so that you do one, over a 3-year time span, let's say, and we can pay off a chunk at a time. But it's all reimbursement payments, so it's important to know. So I think essentially that's it. This is my contact information. We're located in Petaluma, but we cover, like I said, we cover Sonoma County, so feel free to contact me or ask me after with any questions. Thank you.
And we'll have time at the end for one question. Thank you, Jim.
That was great. I think there's enough for everybody.
And I do have some general handouts on the table over here if anybody's interested on EQIP and forest assistance to look through it.
And I hope people are signing up the sheet, the little sign-up sheet, so we can keep informing you of more of these events. So if you could sign it, it would be great.
All right. I'm ready.
back to the other slide, please. I'm Megan Sheeline. I work in the vegetation management program at CAL FIRE for our Sonoma Lake Napa unit. And my main job entails planning fuel reduction projects, evaluating them in the field and writing the environmental documents so our folks can go out and implement those projects. And then part of my job is also shepherding grantees through their fuel reduction projects when they receive a grant from CAL FIRE through the State Responsibility Area Fire Prevention Fund. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. You probably are pretty familiar with the State Responsibility Area fee, but just as a reminder, it is paid by all owners of habitable structures in State Responsibility Area. And the purpose of those funds is to fund fire prevention services also within the SRA. And so the SRA fee money goes to fund many prevention programs at CAL FIRE, including our vegetation management program and our defensible space inspectors that are hired on seasonally to inspect people's properties. And also, we've had grants for the last 2 years for other people to implement fire prevention. And as a reminder, State Responsibility Area is the area of California where CAL FIRE is financially responsible for suppressing wildfires. These grants have been available for the last 2 fiscal years. Unfortunately, the application period for this fiscal year's grants closed a few weeks ago. So I'm going to talk about the process, and then hopefully we'll have these grants every year and you'll be ready to apply next year if they are around. We're not the ones who decide where the SRA fee money goes. That's the state legislature, so we're very hopeful that it will be every year, and that's kind of the sense we get, but we're not sure. There's 3 main types of eligible projects. The big one is fuel reduction projects, which could be vegetation reduction along roads for safe evacuation, ingress, egress purposes, and then also vegetation removal along ridge tops and around neighborhoods. And so those projects can be done a variety of ways, using hand crews or masticators or bulldozers or any other type of equipment. There's a large range of types of projects you can implement through your framework. Another type of project is education and outreach. And so you do community mailers or workshops and spread the message about fuel reduction. And then the third one is prevention planning on a neighborhood scale. Another type of project that I should have put on here is community chipping programs. That's one that is allowed and encouraged, is to start some type of recurring program in your neighborhood where you're actually allowed to purchase equipment up to a certain amount and start that type of program that can, end up helping people for a long time. So there's one main thing that I think the grant reviewers are looking for, and that is if you can show that your project will reduce the wildfire threat to habitable structures in state responsibility area. That's definitely the goal of the program, and so the more you can show that, you'll be on your way to success with your application. The grants are open to all types of nonprofit organizations. So chances are if you are some type of organized community organization, you would fit one of these types. They're not available to other state agencies or federal agencies. So the first round, there were a lot of applications from state parks, and they were good projects, but it ended up not being okay for other states. So the basic rules for this last round of funding, which will probably be somewhat similar the next time, you could request up to $100,000, and you could purchase equipment up to $40,000, but not more than that for the rest of your grant. It could not fund defensible space inspections, and the reason for that is because that's something that CAL FIRE is already mandated to do. So we do defensible space inspections on private properties, and so you can't apply for a grant for something that the state agency has already provided. You can't have administrative costs over 12%, and the purpose of that is because they really want to get projects on the ground. And so the purpose of the grant is not to fund someone's full-time staff, but, you can't have a small admin cost because there's recognition that there's time involved in administering the grant, and so you can pay staff to do that, but just not their full-time job. And then other fire protection infrastructure, you can't install or maintain it with the grant. So just to give you an idea of the first round of grants that were funded in fiscal year 14-15, we had 3 roadside fuel reduction projects and 4 fuel reduction projects around communities in the Sonoma Lake Map unit. One of them has been fully implemented, so I was going to go through that as an example. This is in the La Jolla neighborhood, which is in the western hills of Napa County. It's one way in, one way out, pretty heavily vegetated with winding roads and pretty narrow, and probably similar to a lot of the communities that folks are dealing with. And the red polygon, we had already done some fuel reduction along the yellow road, that's Dry Creek Road, or Mount Vita Road. And we had used inmate hand crews to do fuel reduction along that road. And then the grantee used the grant funds to connect the fuel break all the way around the back of the community using hand crews. And one thing that I was really impressed with on this grant was that they got 100% participation from the landowners that were in the project area. And next slide. Oh, there's a couple more pictures before I talk about that. So there's just a before and after picture. They did some fuel reduction along paved roads and then some just through the middle of parcels to connect the roads together. And this is in between the paved roads. Next slide. I've learned that there's a few challenges along with these SRA grants, and one of them is obtaining permission from the landowners where you want to do the fuel break. And so the way it typically works is you apply for the grant, and then once you receive it, then you go out and try to obtain landowner permission. And depending on the size of the parcels and how many landowners there are, it can be pretty time consuming, and if not everyone agrees to the project, it can kind of piecemeal your project a little bit, and that can be not as good as a continuous shaded fuel break. So just something to think about when you are applying for a grant is the level of community support that you have, and then also if you have a lot of really small parcels versus a few large ones with fewer people to do outreach for, things like that. Another thing to think about is how much time will be spent managing the grant. I'm sure a lot of people in here have managed grants before, and so you know that there's more time involved than you think there's going to be. Consulting with people and working with landowners and answering questions and doing invoice packages and things like that. And so something to think about is if there's someone at your organization who would take the lead on implementing this grant, because if not, I've seen things kind of maybe fall by the wayside. And then complying with CEQA is another challenge that we can help you with. You go to the next slide.